Tonight's topic is a little more. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Doug Force, and we'll try this take two. Tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about child trauma and child suicide. It's a bit of a sad topic to get into, but it's very important that parents become aware of what's going on in their children's lives, especially now with the way that these tyrannical so-called leaders in both the medical and political world are treating us. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go on a little rant before we start the show tonight, because Dougie Ford, that wonderful Premier of Ontario, has decided that no, he is going to do vaccine certificates or vaccine passports. And starting on September 22nd, people in Ontario will be required to prove a full vaccination, 2 doses plus 14 days at the entrance of the following settings. And restaurants and bars, excluding outdoor patios, delivery and takeout, indoor and outdoor areas of nightclubs, meeting and event spaces, except for banquet halls, conference and convention centers. Facilities used for sports and fitness activities and personal fitness trainings. So gyms, fitness and recreational facilities, with the exception of youth recreational sport. Sporting events, casino halls, casinos, bingo halls, and gaming establishments. Concerts, music festivals, and theaters and cinemas. Strip clubs, bathhouses, and sex clubs. Racing venues, except horse racing. And that's the list in its entirety. Now, please take note. Walmart, Costco, Home Depot, Loblaws, Sobeys, etc., etc. All of these wonderful supporters of his political campaign are off this list. So I'm guessing that this COVID-19 doesn't go to those places. It's only at bars and restaurants and nightclubs. And I mean, ladies and gentlemen, how absolutely ridiculous is this? It just boggles the mind as to how they can do this. And regrettably, a great part of the population accepts this pure tyranny. There's no other word for it. I mean, you got to take a breath and just wonder what's going on here really. What are they really doing? As far as it was noted a few days ago that during this COVID pandemic, Dougie Ford's net worth has tripled. How wonderful for him. And, how many homeless people has he created? How many small businesses he crushed? And so on and so forth. You got to scratch your head and ask yourself, what the hell is really going on? A funny aside, I was out at Staples the other day. I was doing some photocopying, etc. And I went to the cashier because I was picking up something, and I found something that was hanging there right at the cashier. I want to show you something here. See that? It's Hanes, the underwear company, are making kids face masks. Please take a look at the age range, ages 5 through 12. And these are soft cotton blend, breathable, and washable. And then you turn it over onto the back, and they're basically describing underwear for the face for children. These things don't protect kids from anything, or adults, or anybody. These are from an underwear company that makes face masks out of underwear material. Oh, God. There's so many other examples. I'm not going to get into that tonight. I think I've ranted on a little bit here for you, but you're looking at vaccine passports now in Quebec, in Ontario, in Manitoba, and in British Columbia. I don't know when Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick and PEI will be instituting theirs. Here in Alberta, where I happen to be staying with a good friend right now, that's not on the horizon, and neither in Saskatchewan. As a matter of fact, the city of Saskatoon yesterday had a city hall meeting, and the measure for bringing in vaccine passports there was defeated. So maybe the Ontarians need to take a little lead from the people out here in Saskatchewan as to show up for these meetings and stop this tyranny. Anyways, enough of me ranting. I'm going to bring on our guest tonight. We have Michele Smith, and she's a trauma specialist specializing in childhood trauma. And joining us after Michele has the microphone for a few minutes to enlighten people, we have Jason from Take Action Canada, and we'll be delving into a paper that he co-wrote with Dr. Alexander. And Dr. Alexander was invited to participate tonight, and maybe he will show up. I'm not really sure. I never got full confirmation. But if not, we have Jason here to handle that. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Michele Smith, the trauma specialist, and Ed's going to take both Jason and I off screen and give the microphone and the camera to Michele. So please go ahead, Michele. You do have to unmute yourself.
I'll get the hang of it. How am I doing? I thought it was probably a good idea just to start with a really brief explanation of what trauma is, and that it can result from an event or any series of circumstance that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally dangerous or threatening in any way, life-threatening or even threatening to a loved one. And it can even be a perceived threat, a threat to one's safety or the safety of a loved one. And it's usually categorized by feelings of helplessness, fear, terror, and the individual is unable to make sense or come to terms with the circumstance. And it usually includes things like abuse of power, betrayal of trust, entrapment, pain, confusion, helplessness, and or loss. And so what may traumatize one person may not traumatize another. So it tends to be very, very subjective. But when we have a threat to our own safety or the safety of a loved one, our body is going to automatically, our system is going to flood with chemicals, our nervous system, readying it for a fight, flight, and perhaps freeze response. When that can't be executed, when you can't run or you can't fight, that response is going to stay stuck in your nervous system, and you've got a switched on nervous system. And now that's making the decisions for you in life, not the cognitive brain, because the frontal lobe tends to go offline. So that'll cause a myriad of symptoms in children and adults. And I see both children and adults, but a particular concern is our children and the impact that the trauma is having on our children. You may, in very small children, you may see symptoms such as, and this isn't a complete list, and you don't have to have all these symptoms to be suffering from trauma either. So I just want to make that clear. I'm really kind of skimming the surface here. You may see some very poor emotional regulation, a lot of crying, emotional outbursts that seem out of, they don't seem to really match the circumstance. You may see, I have witnessed some reverting to baby talk, bedwetting, thumb sucking in smaller children, and a lot of clinginess as well, and not wanting loved ones, parents, caregivers out of their sight in particular. And as they get a little bit older in school age, it affects their learning, their ability to, their problem solving skills, because that's all lays in the frontal lobe part of the brain that's gone offline. So they may be having trouble with math. Of particular note is having trouble, you may give them directions, go to the closet and get these out and then take it over to they can only handle one part. They're not, they haven't absorbed. The reading and absorbing, retaining what they're reading, it tends to escape them a little more. Their concentration and their ability to focus and follow through with goals and any sort of tasks that cause them to move forward, because their basic resilience is really damaged. They may not follow directions well because they haven't absorbed them all. So getting them to repeat that back to you, take one piece at a time and getting them to repeat it back is sometimes helpful. Also, you'll see a lack of, I'm seeing a lot of freeze response right now in kids. And you may find a real lack of physical language expression. They may tend to be somewhat frozen in their bodies, and not able to express themselves physically. And so you may see sleep disorders, depression, and again, now we're talking as we get into a bit of an older age, you're likely to see things like self-harm, cutting. You may see lack of danger cues. So now we have risky behavior, because danger cues are just, how those seem to have taken a walk. So they're indulging in risky behavior. Drug addiction is a big one as well. Feelings of helplessness. Their relationships are usually quite hampered, and they tend to isolate. A lot of gaming and so on, and you can see suicidal ideation as well. So we have quite a range of you may see real problems in relationships, attachments, difficulty in forming relationships with peers as well. So there's quite a range, and there's certainly more than this that I could come up with. But the freeze response in kids is really preventing them from moving forward in their schoolwork, from moving forward, period. Their whole futures are really uncertain. Everything has kind of been pulled out from underneath them. They don't know anymore. I don't know what's certain anymore, what isn't. And so they feel very disconnected. Dissociation is something that I will almost always see. And dissociation is on a spectrum. And there's different kinds of dissociation. If I see a child or a young person who is gaming too much, I may see something called imaginative dissociation, and they actually get to the inability to tell the difference between reality and unreality. And so dissociative behavior is usually where the current moment or the current circumstance is too much. So they're going to take a walk from their current consciousness. So you may see them zoning out, and so bringing them back, a real loss of trust and a loss of a sense of self, and some physical shutdown. The other really common one is hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is where the system is scanning constantly for danger. That system is turned on, and I've seen little ones as young as kindergarten be able to tell me absolutely every single person that they saw during their kindergarten time in half a morning, in their peripheral even, what they were wearing from their head to their feet, the colors, the designs on their clothing. And I have listened to them go on and on until I said stop, and they were right. I checked. They don't miss a thing, nothing. And as they get older, you may find them researching, looking for more information. What they're doing is they're trying to ward off whatever is going to come at them next. And so that hypervigilance, it can take a number of forms, but it's almost always there, and as well as a certain amount of dissociative behavior. And so the inability to follow directions or to zone out, that kind of thing, those are all dissociative problems. Sleep disturbances are and another really common one is an easy startle response. You may experience some almost identical to ADHD symptoms. But in a child, you can't tell the difference between ADHD symptoms and trauma symptoms. And so there's a lot of symptomology there, but there's reasons for it. There's just the system is driving them. And so that's, I don't know how far along I am, Doug, in my 7 minutes, but.
No, you're doing absolutely wonderful. Thank you. And to all the parents out there, we've put the website up for Michele Smith here at traumapractitioner.com. And there you'll find a far more in-depth explanation as to what's really what you look for within your children. And she is available through her website for consultations with you. She actually does remote consultations. So if you're not in her neighborhood, she has the ability to work with your children from her home all across this what used to be a great country that's now not so good anymore. Regrettably. But hopefully with this election we can get somebody new in there that will help and end this tyranny once and for all.
Right.
So let's bring Jason into the conversation, because Jason's here because he wrote, along with Dr. Alexander, a wonderful paper. And I see that Dr. Alexander is in the green room. He's having a little bit of microphone trouble, and hopefully he will be joining us once Ed sorts that out with him. But Jason, how would you speak to what Michele had to say about child trauma, being that you've done this research for? Go ahead. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself, Jason.
There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my contribution was creating an evidence package, which is called the Deaths of Despair, a Child Suicide Evidence Package. Essentially, through Take Action Canada, that's the group I belong to. You can check out our website at takeactioncanada.ca. We work on initiatives, and then we brainstorm and help each other and essentially try to bring attention to, but also get a course of action that citizens can get involved in. So the particular one that was dear to my heart was the horrific increase in child suicide during and because of the lockdown. Like during 2020, the kidsphone.ca received over 4 million calls in 2020 compared to 1.9 million calls in 2019. So this lockdown has really got kids fearful, they're uncertain, they're out of their element, they're away from their friends, they don't have the sports, just not being in school, they don't have that one-on-one that they need with their teachers. A lot of younger students who are suffering abuse at home are not getting reported because the teachers aren't even picking up on it. There's not that extra safety net for them. So there was a study done by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they had a hospital in Texas where they were already collecting data for a couple of years prior to COVID. So when this rolled around, they recording the data, they realized that in the month of March 2020 alone, child suicide attempt increased by 2.34 times in 1 month compared to the month from the year before. So this tells us that children don't need to suffer for 3 months or 6 months like an adult would if they lost their job and then they resort to alcohol and they become depressed and eventually have suicide ideation. With children, it's really rapid. As soon as you take them away from their friends and they have uncertainty, they immediately suffer mentally. So this lockdown has been really, really hard on them. For example,
so just stop there for a second. So basically, what Michele is talking about when she talks about child trauma, it happens so much faster in younger children, and it leads so. I mean, could you speak to that a little bit, Michele? Would you mind just taking a second here? I don't mean to interrupt you, Jason, but I think this is an important point for the parents to see.
I think Jason is very correct in what he's saying, because basically adults have a much more adaptation skills to their changing environment. Children don't yet. And so all of a sudden you pull everything that they know that keeps them safe, that their worldview that they believe in, that's part of what their society is, take away their future. And suddenly they, I mean, what do we do now? So they don't adapt to that. They need a secure environment and a predictable environment. They need to know what's going to happen. What time do I eat? What time do I go to bed? What are the rules? This whole and when you tear all of that out from under them that abruptly, and they don't have the adaptive skills that perhaps an adult has, well, here we are. So that's why Jason would say what he would say, that it would happen quicker because of that, in my view.
Well, and thank you for that. We do have Dr. Paul Alexander joining us at this time. Good evening, Dr. Alexander. Jason, would you like to continue on as to what you were saying, and then we'll bring Dr. Alexander in to follow up with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Paul. Good to see you. To my point, then, McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton reported an almost 300% increase in child suicide attempts, serious child suicide attempts, between October and January 2020 compared to the same 4 months from the previous year. Okay, so we're having trouble getting the actual suicide statistics from Stats Can. They're holding them back a little longer than they normally would. But we can see that this is being mirrored all over Canada and the United States. Arizona reported a 67% increase in child suicide. As I told you, in Texas, the attempts were 2.3 times higher immediately in March 2020. There was in Boston's Children's Hospital reported a 47% increase in children hospitalized for suicide attempt and ideation between July and October of 2020 compared to the previous year. There were British infirmaries that reported prior to COVID, they would typically treat like 2 children per week for attempted suicide, but during the lockdown, they were averaging 2 a day, and some of them as young as 8 years old. This is replicated all over. Like we see, this isn't just an isolated incident. So if you think about it, at McMaster in Hamilton, they had 27 serious suicide attempts in 4 months. So that's 5 times more kids tried to kill themselves in 4 months than all the children who were reported to have died with or of COVID in 18 months.
Jason, I think Dr. Alexander has something to add to that. If we could, Dr. Alexander, would you like to add to what Jason was saying, please? You're going to have to unmute your microphone. Thank you. Nope.
Could you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes. So in terms of the suicides and self-harms. Hello? Yes, you could hear me, correct?
Yes, we can hear you. Your microphone is not muted. I did mute mine, so you can talk. Go ahead.
Okay. So Noel, I've read Jason's report and stuff, and it's very good. And the reality about it is that the lockdowns were. Look, when we looked at all of the data across the world in every setting, we found across the world, regardless of where you looked at, there was no instance where no location, no country. We looked at all of the studies produced thus far. There's no instance where the lockdowns worked. In fact, the lockdowns were a catastrophic failure. And the lockdowns presented particularly the poor in society, minorities, women, and children, poor children particularly, it shifted the burden onto them. And it skewed all of the burden towards these minority and vulnerable groups. And we found that the collateral damage from it was catastrophic. In the United States, as an example, we found from about June to July of 2020, about a 400% increase in self-harms. And for example, we did a survey around July of 2020, and we looked at all of the college-age and university-age students in the United States, across the states, between the ages of 18 to 24, as an example. And we found that approximately 30% of them reported that in the last month or so, they considered committing suicide. And that shocked the US administration. And well, as maybe Jason had mentioned, I was there for a brief period. So we were looking at the data coming up from the States, and it really surprised everyone in a very negative way. And the push, it was a very aggressive push at that point to open the society, particularly open schools, because what we were seeing is that like the lockdowns, the school closures were even more catastrophic, because it harmed the poorer kids in society, the minority kids, particularly colored children, because most of these children get their only meals in school in the United States, as an example. Most of them get their hearing tested there and their eyes tested for the first time. And a lot of children are subject to physical abuse in the home and sexual abuse also. And it gets reported in the school setting. It emerges in the school setting for the first time often, and the school setting is the place that captures it and is brought to the attention. So we have hundreds of thousands of instances that have gone unreported and undealt with. Even more harmful was many reports of mothers and fathers engaging in a lot of physical abuse to each other. But how it translated to children is we got reports coming in from different states and evidence and data and examples where the hospitals were letting us know that parents were presenting in the emergency room with their 4, 5-year-old, 10-year-old child in their arms, limp. And they would actually be telling the emergency room doctor in desperation that they think they may have killed their child because they beat the child out of desperation and exasperation, and they were just angry. Often both of the parents were laid off, and when you put that kind of strife in a confined setting for months upon months, per year, as we did last year, and I know it happened in Canada too, it causes people to begin to lash out at each other and hurt each other. And the children are often the tragic victim in the end. So the reality about it is the lockdowns and the school closures caused devastating harm to our children across the world, not just Canada, not just the United States. And the truth about it is that when we look back now, even though we are still within the throes of the situation, we could say that none of these policies by our government, Canada as an example, had any success. And to continue hardening down these policies and keeping them in place, or thinking about reintroducing them or re-entering them, would be a catastrophic mess for the future, because there's no evidence of success. And the reality about it is children are at the lowest risk in this whole situation for problems with COVID. And we knew that after about 1 month. From about April or so 2020, we understood from the data that we were getting from across the world that children were least likely to acquire the infection in the first place. And it had to do with a combination of factors. One being, because we just didn't understand why children weren't getting infected and why they weren't getting ill severely. Yep. And it was because they don't carry the molecular protein, the receptor in the nasal passage, the nostrils, that adults do, older people do. And that's where the virus normally lands and initiates an infection process. So we understood then from a publication by Patel in JAMA that this was part of the explanation. We also understood too that children got generally 3 to 4 common colds, coronaviruses during the year, mild coronaviruses that cause colds. And this offered children some cross-reactive cross-protection against the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
So may I interrupt you just for a second here, Doctor? I don't want to take you too much, but coming back to what the governments have done here in Canada and throughout the world, it's almost as if we've put them in, these children and parents, into a war zone where they're constantly in fear and risk of dying. And maybe Michele could probably speak better to this than I can. Michele, go ahead. I mean, Michele, by the way, Dr. Alexander, is a trauma specialist dealing with children.
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting. I think Dr. Alexander has really hit on a lot of really important parts. And one of the things that I would have that I see from my end of things, I guess, is that when this initially started, I had the opportunity. I was invited to sit in on a Canada-wide back to school for teachers, and I only lasted 20 minutes because they were propagating the children. You know, we care because we care, little catchphrases, little coloring books, you know. And so I started asking questions because a lot of focus was on, we want to protect the elderly. You know, the elderly could get really sick or die from this. Well, many of the children's grandparents lived with them or they saw them regularly. When did we start making children responsible for grandma's life or death? This is just inexcusable. And so I watched as they literally laid that in the laps of children. You know, you're now you know, what happens to that child if grandma falls down the stairs and breaks a hip and dies? You know, after all this. And the other thing is with the separating them from the school and so on, this is paramount to how children emotionally regulate. They learn to emotionally regulate with other children. And so I would when I had a particularly you know, sad case, I would say to the parents, you find another parent where you can have a play date for this child face to face. And when they would come back, the transformation was absolutely amazing. And so that within itself, I just wanted to add, actually, I guess, to what Dr. Alexander was saying, just from the traumatic side of things, and the fact that you know, we have laid, you know, inexcusable responsibility in the hands of our children, and it's all fear driven, all of it. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Michele. Dr. Alexander, I'm sorry to have interrupted. Come on back on, and please, you were going on about the receptors within the nasal passages for children for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know, a combination of that, a combination of children being immune, having some level of immunity in place from prior common cold coronaviruses. We've also some recent research we were looking at just got published, preprint, seems to suggest that the immune system is actually even primed to recognize the virus. So we began to understand more clearly why children weren't getting infected in the first place readily, and why they weren't going on to severe illness. But then when we looked at the data across the world for the last year, it has been very stable and very clear and definitive, and it has not changed. And it's not new data. It's existed for about 14, 15 months. We looked at all of the publications, and what we know for sure is that children are at very low risk of spread to other children. The reporting science indicates this. They don't readily spread to adults. The spread is typically from home clusters, adult to child. Children don't necessarily spread it to their teachers, very exceedingly low risk. And children don't take it home. Whilst children drive seasonal influenza home, COVID has spared our kids in that regard. They don't necessarily take it home. And more importantly, the risk of death is, we call it statistical zero. And I'm trying to explain it from that point of view, in the sense that if you look at the United States as an example, I think Canada had about 25 or 30 deaths last year for the first year. America recorded about 300. So it stands to reason. It's about 10 to 1 in terms of size of population. So that makes sense, roughly, a rough comparison. The issue, though, is the CDC has been reluctant to release the information as to the diagnosis. They pegged COVID to these 300 odd deaths. Now, every death is tragic of a child, but the CDC would not explain whether the death was causal or incidental. Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins, he's one of the top epidemiologists, and he's always in the media. he and his team looked at the 300 odd deaths registered in the United States over the last year from COVID, assuming that we want to accept those deaths were due to COVID. So they looked at it, they looked at the autopsies, and they looked seriously at each case. And what he has reported now is that save for one instance, which still was questionable to his team. So every child that passed had a very serious underlying medical condition, such that these children were very sick. And they cannot say for sure whether the death was caused due to the virus, due to the illness. So this is the problem that we have. But we can't get a reporting clear. But in terms of children, remember, in America, influenza kills about 600 kids a year. So roughly twice as many die per year that have died from COVID. And we are talking about that 300 is over the 18 months, a year and a half.
So can I ask you a quick question here? So they say 300 children died in the U.S. That's about 1 million to 1. For every 1 million people, one child died in the United States from supposedly COVID. How many child suicides took place during that same time period?
In America,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see if I could recollect the exact number.
Jason, do you have that number? I know that you got into a lot of trouble down in the States for pointing this out to Donald Trump. At least so the story goes.
You mean me and President Trump?
Weren't you on his team?
Yeah, I worked. I reported to President Trump. That's a very interesting situation. I don't have that number in front of me, but I mean,
was it more than 300?
Absolutely. The reality about it is the lockdowns caused a tremendous spike in child suicides across the United States, in every state, and that was why at a certain point, maybe around July, August, when you saw the president on the stage, I mean, I'm not getting into anybody's politics here. I'm just talking about
I understand.
And the government. We were feeding him and talking to him behind the scenes and showing him the evidence. Plus, it was coming up to him from multiple sources that the children were committing suicide, and that his push, you could have seen by his verbiage, his language, was to open his society and open his schools. And there was this tremendous tension and fight between him and the unions and the CDC and the task force, because their proclivity was to keep the schools closed, keep the lockdowns in place. So that's it became a political issue and moved away from the public health aspects, which was terrible because, again, many people lost their lives. Remember, we saw data that showed us that many thousands, tens of thousands of business owners, employees of those businesses that were closed, and children were committing suicide across the United States. And the media weren't reporting it as it occurred because at that point, remember, the government, Trump et al., was trying to open his society. They were trying to keep it closed. So from the political point of view, and that played out in front of the world, the media seemed to have aligned itself with that dictum to keep it closed. So they were not reporting the tragedies that we were actually seeing in raw data coming from the states would feed up the line. So,
what's reflected in the United States is, what's reflected in the United States is also reflected here in Canada.
I can imagine.
And Canada, I know that Take Action Canada has been doing a lot of research on this along with Jason. Did you and Jason co-wrote this paper, did you not?
Yes, and Jason had a very heavy hand into it. I gave a lot of input and guidance, but I was very much impressed by what he did in terms of how he organized it and put it together.
I wonder if I might bring Jason back up, and because I want to get some statistics for Canada, and I know that if you don't mind for a second, we'll let
Yes.
Jason. Thank you.
Well, like I said, the Stats Can isn't giving out the death statistics, suicides yet. Now, normally you get them by August for the previous year. They're saying it probably won't be till after December, so they're deliberately pushing it back. But Alberta did give me the preliminary for theirs, and they're suggesting that in the 10 to 15 and the 15 to 20-year-old bracket, that it only increased by 1 suicide death during the lockdown. And I find that reprehensibly, I just find that wrong. It's just not possible that we've got a 271% increase at McMaster in Hamilton of serious attempt. When I mean serious attempt, I mean they didn't do it this way. They did it, I did it the long way, not the wrong way. Like, these kids were trying to kill themselves. It wasn't a plea for help. They meant business. So it seems really unlikely that only one more person killed themselves during the lockdown in Alberta compared to normally when we have 67% increase in Arizona, 47% in Boston. It's just unlikely. So I think the numbers aren't being given out properly yet, and we won't know for sure till the end of the year. But we do have the proof that the children are suffering. We have the proof that their education is suffering. That's also important. I mean, in high school, the high school marks at the midterm, they were looking at a failure rate of 16% last year during the lockdown, online learning, the hybrid. So that's double from the previous year. So essentially, as soon as they went into the hybrid online learning 3 times a week, they doubled their failure rate.
That's not very good.
There was, I think his name was Raul Spara. He was the president of the Ontario Federation of University Faculty Association. He made a comment. He was quoted as saying, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic and the scramble to move to online courses, we have lost the human connection and the quality of education has suffered. I mean, there are education experts that are speaking out about this. So in addition, you take the kids out of their school where they have their friends, their peers, their sports, they're happy. They need the routine. They need to be in a routine. You take them out of that. You put them on the online learning 3 times a week. They start failing. They're miserable. They miss their friends. They're scared, and then they're not getting checked on by the teachers who would catch some of these problems. And then the child suicide increases. I mean, there was a case just here in Mississauga, Milton, where 3 boys held hands and jumped off an apartment building window, and somehow they magically lived. It was only mentioned briefly in the news as if it was an accident. But I have some friends from Milton who know people in that area, and they say they tried to commit a suicide pact, and that teachers from the Milton school said it was a thing, that kids were having suicide pacts, that they were going to kill themselves together because they couldn't take this anymore. And this never made the media. This was never discussed.
What's interesting now, and I'm finding with everybody's talking vaccine passports, and pushing this non-vaccine, and Dr. Alexander, Michele, and Jason, let's speak to this, because the more pressure comes on children now and families to get this vaccine, and they're pushing this for. As a matter of fact, didn't they hold in the square down where the Toronto City Hall is? Didn't they hold a ice cream giveaway for parents to bring their children down to get them vaccinated just a couple of months ago? I mean, how much trauma do they actually have to put these children through, and how much fear do we have to instill in society? Anybody? Go ahead, Michele, Dr. Alexander.
That's a really good question. This constant driving the fear and driving the fear and driving the fear. When they, as Jason pointed out, within the schools, as long as you're giving them altruistic catchphrases, you are also putting the children in a position where they're a whole lot less likely to go to somebody and say, "I'm scared to death." And so now we don't have any place to go, because they're telling us we're doing this to be virtuistic, and so this entire thing with the vaccines, our history has shown us repeatedly. We see it. We don't just see it in the Holocaust victims and the residential school victims, where when choices are taken away, when we decide what's best for someone else, and you've got trauma and you think we would learn our lesson, and it doesn't appear that we do. You see it in rape victims, you see it in assault victims, you see it in accident victims. You see this continual long-term, often devastating trauma when you cause a helplessness like that, and people have no ability to fight back, and they're actually forced or manipulated into something that they don't want to do. And I recently saw that the BC Premier actually was bragging and saying, well, ever since we threatened vaccine passports, we've seen an uptick in people signing up for the vaccine. And I'm thinking, you're bragging about manipulating people. Are you kidding me? So again, all we're doing is more traumatization and more traumatization. And you'd think that we would have learned from our past, but it doesn't appear that we have. So
nobody really watches history. Dr. Alexander, do you have something to speak to this, or Jason?
Well, look, let me say it this way. So again, I don't know everybody's position on their politics and where they are even on these vaccines. I have not even had a long enough conversation with Jason to understand his positions, etc. But let me explain to you the way I see it. We just discussed the fact that, the CDC data tells us from 0 to 14 years old, the risk of survival for kids is 99.99%. And I think from 0 to 19 is 99.997% or something like that. And then 20 to 49 is 99.98. So all this to say is that this emergency really, we figured out very early on, after about 1 month, so maybe by around the 3rd week to 4th week of April, that COVID was amenable to risk stratification. And we understood that your baseline risk, age risk, was prognostic on your outcome in terms of severity or mortality. So we knew that if you took an age risk stratified approach to managing this pandemic, this emergency, a more focused approach, that the right approach would have been to properly secure the elderly high-risk persons whilst allowing the lower-risk healthy in the society to live a largely unfettered life, normal lives, where they could live naturally, allow their natural innate immunity to work, allow their immune systems to be taxed and tuned up daily as normal, and not lock them down, so that they can become naturally immune to this virus, and that we could do as we did before. We can use the well in society with natural immunity to then turn around and protect the high-risk people. But we did not do that. And the reality is we want always to create a risk differential between the well and the at risk. But we did not do that. What we did was the opposite. We locked down the healthy, and we still failed to secure the elderly high risk. We had killing fields in our nursing homes in Canada. Literally, 80 to 85% of the deaths happened there. And I want, at some point in the future, government officials, all of the bureaucrats and technocrats, and all of the nursing homes to be held accountable, because a lot of their decisions was based around failures to protect the elderly there properly. That's number one. We had early treatment that we failed to use that has been very effective in reducing the risk of hospitalization and death. And many of our elderly and our parents and our grandparents died needlessly. They would have been alive. Right now, the death count in America is 650,000. And we modeled that with early treatment, had it been used, we'd have saved 530,000 of them. But as to the vaccine, because children have such low risk of acquiring the virus in the first place and of spreading it, as well as getting severely ill if infected, then as a parent and as a society, you have to ask yourself a simple question. This is a risk management decision now. And the question is, look at the benefits and look at the risks. I argue that the vaccines offer no opportunity for benefit, just potential opportunities for harms. Why? Because we're seeing the harms that are accumulating right now in the elderly, in older persons, adults who've taken, even teenagers in America and other countries who've taken these vaccines with the pericarditis and myocarditis. These are very serious conditions. These are not mild, simple things. You have loss of cardiac reserve and potential heart failure in 20 to 30 years. When your 15-year-old today is 35 or 40, their heart can just stop. So who tries to tell you that the myocarditis, that's no big deal? That's very duplicitous and reckless. And that those people their medical licenses should be stripped. So the reality about it is that our children are candidates, and I argue the vaccine is contraindicated to them because they do not bring the risk to the table that they could benefit from this. If you're telling me about an elderly person and you properly, ethically consented them and they made a decision, but I'll be blunt. I don't know your position and I don't want to be controversial. I know this is Jason's position.
No. I was going to say, would you write this off to incompetence, or would there be an ulterior motive going on here? Should we follow the money? From your perspective,
well,
we're pretty much everybody here on the panel tonight would probably not take the vaccine because it isn't a vaccine. We know it's not a vaccine. It doesn't qualify as a vaccine.
Correct. So we have this situation that good. So if this is the mindset, then the question becomes, normally you know that it takes medically, even the FDA has rules that if you are bringing a gene product to market from conception to final product, a genetic product, be it medication, whatever, it's very different than even a drug or a normal vaccine. You need 15 years of surveillance follow-up. 15. So this is a gene product. So normally you would need 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 years to bring a vaccine to the market. They took 3 months, 4 months, with just 2 months of regulatory data. So the question then is this: how could you be assured that giving your child these vaccines, or anyone, when we do not have the proper safety data, that we could exclude harms? And I know you understand everything I'm saying. The aim of the trial is not just to determine the efficacy, and the effectiveness of these vaccines are in serious question now. I argue, you might find it bizarre, but I argue that these vaccines never worked day one. Now we know they don't work because what you're seeing in Israel and UK and even the United States, you have 95% of the Israeli population vaccinated and 90% of them have reinfection, have infection again. They've tried now the booster shots, third shot, and we have evidence now that people are becoming infected again. Well, of course, because the booster is the same Wuhan strain spike. It's not the Delta spike that is in that vaccine for the booster. So, of course, the vaccine will fail. So we have the vaccine is failing. It has failed. So the question is, why would you consider giving your child a vaccine that has failed? Number one, why would you consider when your child brings no risk to the table? The data is absolutely clear. There's no question about it. No one can argue the data on children. So the vaccine has failed. Children have no risk. And you want to give them this vaccine when it confers no benefit to them, only harm. We've seen the harms in the CDC's VAERS vaccine adverse reporting database, where right now there are 13,000 deaths 1 to 2 days post-vaccine. We have 600,000 adverse events post-vaccine. We have 20,000 deaths in Europe post-vaccine, 1 to 2 days, 2 million adverse events. So we have this serious conundrum that we're in now. And you have people in the United States, the CDC and the NIH telling you, the world, because really America sets the tone, even for Canada, telling us that, well, we need children in the mix because we can't get to population level immunity if we don't vaccinate children. Well, that's garbage, because that's just junk. They don't know what they're talking about then. Because if you factor in everyone who has had COVID naturally and recovered, they have immunity technically for life. If you factor in the 15 to 20%, so that's about 50% of the population. The other 15, 20% are from cross protection, cross reactivity that we have from exposure, even adults, to prior coronaviruses. So the population always had about 50 to 70% of immunity in place. We only needed a vaccine if we were going to give this vaccine out, and I don't support it. Maybe 5, 10, 15 million Americans, those people 75 and 80 and above, the highest risk people. No one else. My philosophy has always been no vaccine, period. We could have managed this without it.
So we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to bring this question to all three of you. So there's a big push on now for vaccine passports. What do you think is really happening here? Why? I did my little rant at the beginning of the roundtable tonight. Dougie Ford has brought out vaccine passports for Ontario, but very limited where you need them for restaurants and nightclubs, et cetera, but not Walmart and not Save-On and not Costco, et cetera. What's really going on behind all of this? Is this a conspiracy theory, a control measure for society? They're looking to take over the world, or is this just pure incompetence and greed? Because Dougie Ford, I mentioned that he tripled his net value in the last 18 months. He's 3 times richer than he was before COVID. So go ahead, Jason, why don't you start this one?
Okay. Well, we know they're lying also about how many people have taken the vaccine in Ontario. And every time they increase the number, the restrictions get harder. Well, now they're up to 60%. They introduce more restrictions. Now they're up to 70, more restrictions. It's getting harder on us. You think it would be getting a little easier. And it's just pressure to coerce more people into joining what they perceive to be the bigger group that must be taking it. I know recently a lot of people have jumped on it that I've been hearing about through my friends and people I know, but they're saying now we're at 80%, but 80% won't be enough. It's going to have to be 90. But then the other day they admitted what their record was. I can't remember the number. It might have been like 30,062 was the record number of vaccines they did in a day. Well, they're not doing it every day. They don't set records every day. And if you divide that by the 10 million, whatever the number is, they're saying they vaccinated, it would have took them like 450 days, and they haven't been doing it that long. So there's no way they could have vaccinated as many people as they're claiming. So I think this is just to coerce people, and taking away our restricting our rights and freedoms is to scare you into taking it. People are they're giving up. They're being complacent, or they're frustrated. They want to return to normal. They're getting depressed. The children are depressed. The adults are depressed. The drug overdoses are through the roof. It's crazy. It's a real epidemic. I have a friend who's a first responder. My one friend said that they're picking up an average of 2 people per night who are vaccine injured, and 2 people who are drug overdose. So we're dealing with a lot right now.
I know Mr. Kenny out here in Alberta has said 60% of the population has been vaccinated, and so we need to push for more and more. Yet the reality of that, there's less than 5% of the population here in Alberta has been vaccinated. Michele, any closing thoughts on why they're doing this? Why is the big push for the passport?
I can't give you a professional answer, but I certainly can give you my viewpoint. And I think if you drive enough people with fear, and they disconnect enough from the cognitive part of the brain, you are going to get much more of the public who will stand behind you when you want to tear down the Canadian Bill of Rights and Freedoms and the Nuremberg laws. You're actually, if you're wanting to take that down and be able to override that at will, and take control of Canadians' rights and the ability to protect themselves from the very things that we're seeing right now, you're going to do it by driving a population full of fear.
Well, thank you. And by the way, there's one more, ladies and gentlemen, look up the Helsinki Declaration. You'll be quite surprised to be reading that. Dr. Alexander, any closing thoughts on this vaccine passports and why they're pushing so hard?
With the correct question. So, look, in the beginning, the first couple of weeks in February, I was sitting down in Toronto. I was considering moving to the United States because I got residency at that point, and I was thinking, how I'm going to do this. Should I do it now or just forget about it? And then, I was looking at what the United States was doing with their task force daily on the news. I was seeing what was coming out of Lombardy, Italy. I was seeing what China was saying. And, I was concerned for the first couple of weeks. At that point, I got a position, WHO in Geneva and Pan American Health had reached out to me and asked me if I could provide them technical input to respond to the pandemic. I'm a small island boy, went to McMaster in Hamilton. I was kind of surprised. But I guess it's my area of expertise. So I worked for WHO for the first part of this pandemic. I was their senior advisor, working from Toronto. Then I got asked to come to the White House, the United States, to work for the Trump administration, same capacity. And at that point, my concern gave away because I began to see all of the data, because now I was in the United States government. I was getting everything coming from the rest of the world. And it became very, very clear to me that we wrapped our arms around this quickly, and we knew who the high-risk group was. We knew how to manage it, and we knew how to target it. And as time went on, I began to make my own views heard. They might have considered me a lowly person in the whole scheme of things, but I was asked for my advice now and again. And in meetings that I sat in, I made sure I explained that except for the high risk in society, nobody else should be given a vaccination. We were supposed to end the lockdowns immediately, open schools, stop the mask mandates, because the masks, we did a study, were highly ineffective. They didn't work. So everything was wrong and wrong-sided. And the truth of the matter is, I realized that this was not about lockdowns. This was not about this virus. This virus and the lockdowns and the masks were a means, as the doctor just said, to instill the type of fear, to bend you to become compliant to their will and keep you in this situation, this perennial lockdown, for as long as possible, denying you of your rights, etc. This is about control. So they have now gone to the point of view of, to get out of the mask and the lockdown, you need to vaccinate. And now we need to have these passports that are going to keep tabs and are going to allow you to access the privileges in your society. They're not going to stop there. And when you mentioned Doug Ford gave a kind of a limited vaccine, I don't agree with that. Now, I'll be blunt. I voted for that guy. And that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. I will work hard to make sure he's not reelected in any capacity, because what he's done here is catastrophic. He's lied to the people, and he's defrauded us. He's going to go further. Somehow or the other, he's been flipped. This is not the Doug Ford that we thought we elected. And the reality about it is I'm very concerned, because young people today, as I have gotten older, I would tell my son or my daughter and stuff, we are looking to your generation to hand the world over to, and you're going to take care of us as we get older, because, we are the older ones. But now we've had a recent conversation where I explained, I, Jason, you, the doctor on stage there, we now have to get up and fight to save our children. These 20, 30-year-olds who they don't have a clue what the government is doing to them now in terms of encroaching on their rights, shredding their liberties, and what is going to come next. This is not going to stop at vaccine passports. No way. So it's a very frightening point that we are here. And we need people like Jason to arm the population with information and statistics and data, because the problem is we have the information on our side. Like I could sit on here and spew facts and data to you, Jason, you, all of us here, but we are shut out. But we have 99% of the facts and the truth on our side. We just can't get a podium. But that's okay, because we're still trying and we're still getting through little bits and we're informing. And enough of people. I'm going to end by a couple of statistics for you. Today, as I sit here, 15%, 1/5 of the world is vaccinated. See, we may think through the eyes of Canada what CBC and City Pulse is telling us. They're just bogus news, in my opinion. They lie. Nothing you'll hear from them is the truth. CNN, you should close those places down. 15% of the world are vaccinated. 85% of this entire world is not. 100 nations have less than 4% of their populations vaccinated. Some have 0. So don't feel that we've lost this. The question, though, is we're at a juncture where what we do next is very, very important. We need to stand up now and say no. We're not going to allow these passports. We're not going to allow them. We're not going any further. And we need to punish these people at the polls and not just de-elect them. We need to make sure that we strip them of their pensions, we take away their income, we strip them of everything, because what they have done in the last 18 months, they have costed lives. Many Canadians, many of our parents and grandparents died in those old age homes because of the decisions made by the federal government. Newtown, in the Ford government, all of those people you saw on stage with him, and in the city of Toronto with Dublin, or these people should be held, to me, legally accountable for what they have done. They have costed lives and they have suffered people, and they have to be held to account. And that's why.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. And yes, indeed, and in all the provinces, Jason Kenney out here has not been any less a star than Dougie Ford. All the premiers, all the medical, supposed medical officers within the provinces. I completely agree with you, and I'm sure I would say 99% of our audience agrees with you that these people do need to be held to account.
Yes.
And to take into account also that these children have been put through massive trauma, and some of them have committed suicide.
Yes.
And that is horrific. If they're never held to account for all the dead older people that they've wound up killing, they should be at least held to account for the child suicides that they have contributed to. Because there's no other way to put this. Dougie Ford, you yourself, and Justine Trudeau and Tommy Tam and all of these medical officers, you are responsible for these child's deaths. Yes. And forcing them to kill themselves.
Yes.
It breaks my heart to see what's going on here in Canada. We had such a wonderful nation.
Yes.
And today we've got to clean this up. And the power is in our hands, ladies and gentlemen. It's in our hands. We have to say no, and it will all stop. All of us say no. It's enough is enough. And don't think that you could change anything by electing O'Toole instead of Trudeau, because O'Toole is pro-vaccination, pro-passports, and a globalist. So what good is that going to do for you? There is other groups out there that you have to do research on. I try to remain apolitical in what I do with the roundtables and so forth. But go check out the PCC and the other various groups and hear what they have to say before you think that O'Toole is going to save you. And that's my 2 cents worth of politics tonight. Thank you all very much for coming, Dr. Alexander, Michele Smith, Jason. Very appreciative, and of course to this wonderful audience that we have that comes back time and time again to hear me rant and rave and bring these wonderful guests on. I'm going to get Ed to play us out. We always end with this wonderful song, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and have a great evening. Go ahead, Ed. Takes him a second or two.